Our next guest is the Pulitzer Prize-winning American journalist and former managing editor of the Wall Street Journal, Karen Elliott House. Well, as well as having spent decades covering the Middle East, Karen has just written a new book entitled The Man Who Would Be King. It is a portrait of the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Well, the book goes on sale next month, and its release comes at a time of profound transformation in the region, with Saudi Arabia positioned very much at the heart of it all. We're going to be exploring this growing global role for Saudi Arabia and the ambitions driving the man who would be king. Karen Elliott House, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Al Arabiya English.
Thank you.
I'd like to start by asking you, what made you want to write this particular book? You've written other books on Saudi Arabia, but this particular book on Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman.
I was fortunate to meet him in January of 2016 when I was on one of my visits to the kingdom. And he just struck me as obviously a fascinating guy because he was young, and I had met Prince Salman, Prince Nayef, Prince Sultan, all of the older, not all of them, but many of the older generation, and he was nothing like that. He was completely accessible and informal. And after that, I watched him at the Future Investment Forum and became curious about where did this young guy get these ideas, because they're not in the mainstream of what's been going on in the 40 plus years I had been going to Saudi Arabia. I mean, yes, there was always talk of reform. There was one 5-year plan after another, but they sat on the shelf and not much changed. So then I asked him, would you talk to me? Let me talk to your mother, your other people about what shaped you, what shaped the man who's reshaping Saudi Arabia. He didn't say yes, he didn't say no, but I continued to get to see him. And eventually he agreed to put the interviews on the record.
I'd like to read a little excerpt from your book in which you describe the first encounter at the Arka Palace. You say he was wearing a loose brown robe without a bisht or a shamar, revealing his dark hair carefully combed back. You go on to say he is a young man who does not need the trappings of power or royal pomp because he possesses the essence of true power. And there we can see a clip of that on the screens in front of us. So Karen, at that first conversation with the Crown Prince, and as it unfolded, what was going through your mind, and what was the first impression you started to draw of the Crown Prince in that first meeting?
Well, as I said, I was struck by several things. His informality. He wasn't sort of puffed up on me important to you down there. He just talked. You ask a question, he gave an answer. He seemed to be, I do regard him as a marketer, someone who is constantly, if you will, selling Saudi Arabia. He clearly has the pride in his country, and he explains a little history, but then he answers whatever question you're asking. He went through a lot of things. I mean, he was saying at that time, he was, a lot of people were calling him Mr. Everything. And he kept insisting, I'm not a one-man show. I'm part of a group that is trying to advance the interest of Saudi Arabia. But mostly it was just, I was struck by how easy it was to talk to him. He spoke the first time in Arabic, but he constantly corrected the translator, so he clearly, his English was good, mostly corrected him on numbers. And, he just, he he was very comfortable in his own skin, as we Americans say.
Okay, and you say the encounter was informal. I mean, did it get less formal, perhaps as you both sort of got to know each other a little bit over these 6 different encounters? And just an aside, what did you actually call him?
I call him Your Royal Highness, but I mean, yeah. My point is, even in that first interview, I felt very comfortable. Asking him questions about now versus the way things used to be. I mean, he probably did get slightly more informal. I think the last time I saw him, not too long ago, he said, I walked into his office and he said, "Long time no see," shook hands, and then pointed at my abaya and said, "You don't have to wear that." And I said, "Yes," and sat down and went straight into my questioning, because I find wearing an abaya an easy thing to do. I did not do it when I first went to Saudi Arabia. I wore normal American clothes, and in 1978, that was fine. By 1980, someone in Prince Turki's office, who was then the head of intelligence, said to me, "I can't drive you home to your hotel if you don't wear this." And he gave me one of those big silk abayas and a scarf to cover my head and face with. So I've worn an abaya ever since. I don't cover my head unless I'm ordered to by the religious police or by a religious judge I saw.
So you've seen sort of 2 transformations of Saudi Arabia, it seems. Yeah. One in your first visit in 1978, when perhaps things were less conservative, then a more conservative country. And now you're seeing again a country that's perhaps modernized some of the attitudes. And I want to ask you, because I mean, you've mentioned history more than once, and you've said in your book as well that the Crown Prince has a keen interest in history. And I'm just wondering how that came across in your conversations with him. I mean, did he draw on historical examples? Did he give you a brief potted history of Saudi Arabia? How did that come across?
Well, he talks about, more the history of Saudi Arabia, although he will refer to the prophet, or what religion does require or doesn't require. But it's more talking about the history of Saudi Arabia. And, when I ask him, I'm intrigued that by the fact that he's so young and powerful, and comparing that to other young rulers in history like Peter the Great, or Julius Caesar's son, Caesar Augustus, who ruled Rome for more than 40 years. And I asked him, once the Caesar Augustus was asked, "What do you want your epitaph to be?" And he said, "I found Rome in clay and I left it in marble." And so I said to the Crown Prince, "What would you like yours to be?" And he was not scared off by the question, or he seemed to certainly know who Caesar Augustus was. And he said, I found Saudi, I don't remember his exact words, but basically he wasn't as grandiose on his accomplishments as Caesar Augustus. He said, "I found Saudi Arabia in essence good shape, and I left it in better working with other people." I mean, he seems constantly to try to make the point that he is working with a team, and not being just me, myself, and I.
You mention in the book that, and this helps to sort of set the scene and try to imagine what it was like. I'm assuming your meetings took place in his office, because you talk about a desk stacked up with paperwork. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you mentioned that.
Palace, or a lot of people have offices, and he has an office
Okay, so he's got this office, and you say that there's a lot of paperwork on the desk in your book. And I'm wondering if you mentioned that because it surprised you, because, you know, we think of the Crown Prince as being tech savvy. He's also a millennial. He's not quite 40. And therefore, I wonder if you expected him to be a bit more digital and paperless than, in fact, he was.
Yeah, I was just impressed that, as I wrote in my book, the only thing between me and him is all the paper on. It's actually his coffee table that he had a pile of papers on. He has them on his desk too, but he had this pile of papers, and you know, he said he reads on paper because you can digest it better. I mean, which surprised me because he's infamous for keeping the key performance indicators of ministers on his iPad and tracking them. So, you know, and he's talks about playing video games. He's clearly very digital.
Yeah.
But
that's certainly the reputation he has. And as I was saying, not quite 40. I believe his 40th birthday is in August.
he's 39. Mhm.
Exactly, just a couple of months shy of 40. And in your book, you say that the Crown Prince is both pragmatic and ambitious. And I'm wondering if that came across as a constant and consistent theme across all your encounters with him.
Pragmatic and ambitious. Yeah, I think I would say my primary word for him is he is driven. I think he's constantly trying to channel his drivenness into pragmatic things. What can I actually achieve? And one of the things I recount in the book is he wanted to deal with the economic troubles that the kingdom faced when his father and he took over. And one of them was a big budget deficit. And he wanted to reduce benefits. The country had a lot of so-called benefits that government workers got, a benefit for typing or computer expertise or things like that, so that they got more money without putting it in their base salary. And he cut those benefits, which cut the income to people significantly, because his staff apparently told him it'll take some years to really figure out how to target those benefit cuts. And so he said, I'm going to cut the deficit. I'm going to focus on what I can do. That subsequently got reversed, but his father restored the benefits. But to me, the important thing is his view is that if you face a problem, tackle it. Dallying will only make it worse. So somebody advised me this when I became publisher of the journal. If you come to a fork in the road and you don't know what to do, take one, because if you have any intelligence and you're wrong, you'll run back and take the other. If you just stand there at the fork and suck your thumb, you know, you're in big trouble. And I think that's his view. You've got to act, not thoughtlessly act, but if you don't have all the data you need, you have to do the best you can. He's very data driven.
So just in terms of the conversations you had with the Crown Prince, I mean, what was perhaps the one thing that really stood out for you, that really surprised you? Was there anything that made you say, wow, I was not expecting to hear you say that?
Yes, he told me in March of 2023, before the public disclosure of the recognition of Iran, but the restoration of diplomatic relations, he said he was going to do it. And I said, why? I mean, that totally shocked me because, obviously Iran and Saudi Arabia have very different visions for the future of the Middle East. They have been long time opponents. And, he basically said the U.S. is not going to be, he didn't, the bottom line was he didn't trust U.S. protection, and he had all of these economic developments and his goals for the region as a whole, both commercial and security. And so he was going to start talking to Iran. And so
that took you by surprise.
That totally took me by surprise. Yeah. I mean, I think it did a lot of people who watch those two countries. I mean, maybe it didn't surprise Saudis, but I think it surprised a lot of them too.
Okay, you didn't just speak to the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, did you? You spoke to other people in order to write this book.
Oh, yes.
Tell us a bit about who else you spoke to and how forthcoming they were.
Well, I mean, I spoke to many of the ministers multiple times, some of them in multiple jobs, like Ahmed Khatib was, I guess, a former health minister when I first met him, and he was Minister of Entertainment. He took me to the first performance in entertainment performance in Jeddah, and I was shocked to see men and women sitting in the audience together, and Saudi women being the individuals who seated people with their tickets. I mean, that was really shocking to me after 40 years of not seeing men and women, in proximity. I mean, even when I would visit the Saudi home, I was allowed to talk to men, but the wife of the man I was talking to was not allowed around because I had a Saudi male translator, and he obviously wasn't related to her, so they couldn't meet. That always made one feel bad when the wife would put food on the table and then knock on the door and run so she wouldn't be seen by the man she wasn't related to. But I forgot what you asked me.
No, I was asking you who else you spoke to in order to write the book.
Oh,
and
yeah.
how forthcoming they were.
So, I mean, the Minister of Planning, his economic advisors, the Minister of Khalid Fallah, who in many forms as Minister of Energy and Minister of Investment now.
Were they all very open, all of these people, in terms of what they told you, the anecdotes, the descriptions they gave you?
They're very analytical, sometimes anecdotal. The Minister of Commerce told me he had known the Crown Prince since he was a young boy, 10 or 12. I spoke to the man at the Cabinet of Ministers who hired the Crown Prince for his first government job in 2007 when he had just graduated from law school, and apparently the top graduates, or he just graduated from King Saud University, and the four top graduates were entitled to work at the Cabinet of Ministers. This man interviewed him, and my favorite quote from him was that with most of the people, 1 + 1 = 2, but with the Crown Prince, 1 + 1 can = 3. That he has this ability to see beyond what's in front of his face, the kind of visionary aspect.
And what came across when you spoke to people in the Crown Prince's inner circle, and when you spoke to him yourself, what would you describe as being his greatest skill set or his greatest strengths? I mean, is it that what you were just describing there, that ability to analyze and see things beyond those which were obvious?
that's what most of the ministers say, that he is, first, it's a combination of visionary and data-driven and detail-focused. So he reads what he is given, and then when the ministers are all together in meetings, he asks questions about the briefs he has been given. He doesn't just sit there while people go through, the show and tell version. He's done his homework and he asks pointed questions. So it's mastering the detail and then knowing how to put what others see, kind of stretch beyond. I talked to, his family, some of his brothers, and other family members, and the ministers, and Saudi people who interact with him and observe him. I would say young people are very positive about him. I have a chapter in the book called The Pied Piper, that he is like that story of the Pied Piper that children, at least in America, read. The Pied Piper blows this new tune and lures the children behind him, and that the young people in Saudi Arabia are following him, expecting things to get better, and that he will have to deliver. And it's very interesting to encounter people. If you go somewhere like Al Ula, a nice historic site in the kingdom, the tour guides, most of them are women. The lady seating people in the restaurant was a woman. There were waitresses, not just waiters. The kinds of things that were never seen after 1980 in the kingdom are visible everywhere now. It's phenomenal how much has changed. Women driving, obviously. And he did that by saying, we're going to allow it, and then giving people time to mentally adjust. So it took place, I think, about 9 months after he said that, he publicly said it, and then it happened. Women had to pass a test.
And here we are in 2025. Saudi Arabia was the choice of destination for the first state visit by the US President Donald Trump for the second time, and his first as well. How much of a message do you think that sent out to the wider world, that this was the president's first choice of destination?
Well, he went there first in his first presidency too. But I think what has changed over those years is that the Crown Prince has made great progress at, I talk about this in the book, obviously, because he talks about it, that he is not going to choose between China and the US, that he sees Saudi Arabia as playing a major role in international politics, and being friends with Russia because he needs Russia to cooperate on oil production and pricing, being friends with China, being friends with the US, he very much wants, but he doesn't see the necessity of making a choice. And I think he has established now that he doesn't have to. Trump stood up in his speech in Saudi Arabia and said, after having pushed constantly for the big thing he wants is Saudi and Israel to establish diplomatic relations. He looked at the Crown Prince and said, you will do it in your own time. So he seems to be accepting that there are some things he can't dictate, that this young man has set up a strategy that's working for Saudi Arabia. He still needs, in my view, the kingdom still needs much more foreign investment than it is getting. Even though it has a lot of money, its spending priorities are enormous. So it does need money. And I think while Trump hopes to get money out of Saudi Arabia, the Crown Prince also hopes to get investment into Saudi Arabia from the U.S., especially high-tech investment, and he is getting some of it. So right now, it looks like things are working. His strategy for playing a more prominent role in the world is succeeding. And that was recognized but not created by Donald Trump.
I just wanted to talk about you a little bit because we're coming to the end, and I'd just like to find out a bit more about how, as you were, a young person from Matador in Texas, which is a town which even today has a population of less than 600 people. What first drew you to the Middle East and specifically to Saudi Arabia? I mean, I know it was work, but was that something you wanted to do? Was that somewhere you wanted to go? And if so, why?
No, I always wanted to travel. Matador is such a tiny little place, there's not much there. So I went to the University of Texas. And there were 25,000 students when I got there. So nobody paid attention to me. And that was wonderful because in Matador, everybody knew, as Rosalind Carter said when her husband ran for president and she was from Plains, Georgia, everybody knew everything I ever did. And it was true in Matador. People watched you, and my father was very strict, very Saudi in that sense. No pants, no shorts, no TV, no telephone. I mean, the Saudis weren't that strict. And so when I went to Saudi Arabia, I went there the first time because I was a diplomatic correspondent and the U.S. was selling planes to Israel, and the Saudis and planes to Saudi, and Israel was objecting, so I wanted to deal with that. But I never. That first time I went to the oil minister's house, Zaki Yamani. It was a normal evening. I mean, I was dressed normal. All the other women were dressed in fancy clothes and amazing jewelry. I never felt alien in Saudi Arabia because that very first time I went to a, quote, welfare service, which was a church service in Saudi Arabia with the then Saudi ambassador, the governor of South Carolina, John West. So having grown up going to church, and my father approved of no dating, as I said, no TV. The only thing you could do was read a book, preferably the Bible. So I knew a good bit of history. I knew the Apostle Paul had gone to Arabia after his conversion on the road to Damascus. He went to Arabia for a number of years to reflect on what had happened to him. I didn't really know where Arabia was, but you looked it up on the map. But anyway, it was always a place I found after that first time completely intriguing because I met professional women, a female pediatrician, Hisham Nazar's wife. It intrigued me. Okay. And so I kept going back.
And I just want to ask you, I mean, obviously 5 decades of coverage, more or less, or following events in the Middle East, in particular the Middle East peace process. I mean, how do you feel when you see the situation still unresolved 5 decades on, and perhaps even further from peace than at any stage in the preceding 5 decades?
Well, I think if you read the Bible, you're not surprised. I thought when I went there in 78, after Sadat had been to Jerusalem in 77, and, Israel and Egypt had made peace, that, this is all going to change. And of course, it hasn't over these 50 years. And as you say, is probably further from it right now than ever. I mean, we'll see what happens at this UN conference that the Crown Prince and French president have pushed to organize. But I think Israel is not likely to recognize a Palestinian state anytime soon, and probably not in my lifetime. I'm 77, so they'd have to hurry. But I think it's sadly the case that people compromise in America is a great word, and compromise in the Middle East is almost a dirty word. And we Americans know history. I mean, people don't remember, most of them younger than me don't remember the Vietnam War, certainly not the Revolutionary War or the Civil War. And in the Middle East, people know history, and they can't seem to forget it. So they know who has been enemies with whom and who's done what to whom for not a decade, not a century, but, millennia.
Okay. We're coming to the end. I just want to put a final piece to you, and I want to read one last excerpt as well from your book. It reads as follows. The world would be wise to watch this ambitious and determined prince, talking about Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and his bold plan, which he will pursue in the coming decades, there you can see it on the screen, to position the kingdom with any power that serves its interests. So in a sentence or two, Karen, how would you describe the Saudi Arabia that you think the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman wants to build?
He wants to build a modern kingdom that sends people to the moon, that is a top 10 economy, where young Saudis look after their own interests as opposed to rely on the government to secure their future for life. And it's in everybody's interest if he succeeds. So I am, he may not be a perfect man. Indeed, the Bible says the only perfect man was Jesus. So none of us are perfect, but he, I think, is needed in his country at this time. Somebody with a longevity to actually visualize and achieve big change.
Okay. Well, on that note, we're going to wrap it up, but I'd like to say a really big thank you to you, Karen Elliott House, Pulitzer Prize-winning American journalist, former managing editor of the Wall Street Journal, and also author of this new book, The Man Who Would Be King. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us on Arabiya English.
Thank you.